Release the Kraken!
Good evening, fellow game designers. We're on here with Lame Duck Studios, and we are continuing on with our simple ship. In our last tutorial, we went ahead and we did our texture mapping. You see here, this is the very cheap texture that I made. And we're going to get ready to export this so we can take it into Unreal. So I'm going to go over to my channel box, go ahead and get that going. And a thing you want to pay attention to before you export this out is the direction that your object is. Because in Maya, it's typical to use the z-axis, you can see down here, as our forward axis, because that's the one that faces the camera. However, in Unreal, the x-axis is the forward axis. So if we were to bring this into Unreal as it is, our ship is currently sideways along the x-axis. So as far as you can see when I bring my widget up, this is the x-axis. So Unreal is going to read this as forward, and that's going to be a problem for our ship. So we want to make sure when we export this that it's facing the correct way. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate. So I'm going to grab my rotation tool. And I really just bring this up just to figure out which direction I want to rotate this in. When you do this a few times, you'll kind of get the hang of it, but it's good practice just to kind of figure it out. So you can see that there's colors here, and I can see that this green one, which is my y-axis, is the one that I'm going to want to rotate to get it to face down the correct axis here. So if I come over here, I'm going to go ahead and type that in. You can see I have a minus 94 over here. I'm just going to do minus 90. That's going to give me a nice clean point toward the end there. Now if you want your ship to fly in that direction, that's the way you want it to face. If you wanted it to face the camera, then you would rotate it the other way and have it toward the camera. Okay? And now I want to make sure that this is good in center the way I want it to fly. So I'm going to go up to my top view. And it looks like I'm good in center on my axis here. So there's my center point of origin. The origin is always where Unreal is going to read your object from. So if I put my object here, because my object from this position is where the origin is, Unreal will actually move this pivot to here. Okay, so just be aware of that you want your ship to be positioned on the origin the way it's going to fly. So my ship is actually going to be driven from about here, and that's perfectly fine for me because I have the thrust, and since my thrust is going to be generated from here, it just kind of makes sense that my pivot will be along here. And just to kind of give you an idea of what that means is if I were to rotate this from here, you can see how my ship moves, right? If I were to rotate it from here, you can see it moves differently, right? So instead of bending along, it's kind of orbiting. And then if I were to move my pivot, let's say centrally, whenever I rotate, it would spin around this way. So all these will matter depending on how your ship is going to fly. And I think mine is going to be perfectly fine more toward the end of my ship here. So I'm going to go ahead and move this back. If you want to snap it precisely, you can hold down the X key, and that will snap it to the grid. Or if you want to snap it to a part of your ship, you can hold down the V key and hover near one of your vertices. Okay? So I think that this is probably going to be fine. And if you don't know how to change the widget so you can move it, it's the D key. So you press D, and that'll change it from normal to movable. Normal, movable, normal, movable. You can also press the insert key. It'll do the same thing. From my side view, or in my case, my front view, because remember Z is front in Maya, I'm going to bring this down to center because I don't want my plane to be hovering. So I'm going to go ahead and snap that down. Remember, it's holding the X key to snap to the center. Okay. Now, if you want your plane to fly, again, facing the x-axis, this is how you do it. So if you're flying horizontally, you do it this way. But I actually want my ship to fly vertically. So I'm going to take my ship, and I'm going to rotate it upward so that this part of the ship faces the camera. I have the cockpit here, and I have that. Now again, if you wanted to go forward, you're more than welcome to. I'm going to do the forward flying in a different video just because it's two different setup types, and I don't want to do them both and kind of make it extra long. So for me, I'm just going to have my ship this way, and that's going to be on my X. I'm going to do 90 degrees. There it is. Okay. And then before I export, I want to make sure that I zero these out to make it easier on editing, and then clear out all of my construction history. So the first part, if I go to Modify, and then down to Freeze Transforms, that's going to zero out all of my transforms, so I hit Freeze. And you can see all these are now 0 except for scale. You can't have 0 scale because it would not exist. And then down here for my construction history, I'm going to come over to Edit, Delete by Type, and then History. And now my construction history is cleared out, and I am ready to export. So let's go ahead, make sure we have it selected in object mode. I'm going to go to File, and I come down to Export Selection. Make sure we have FBX Export. If you don't see FBX Export for some reason, go ahead and hit Cancel. You can go up to Window, and then come down to Settings and Preferences, and then the Plugin Manager. If you're in 2018, you can just type it in the search box here. And if you're in 2016 or below, you can kind of scroll all the way down. And the FBX exporter is usually near the bottom. So I'm going to come down here. Where are you at? Where are you at? And there you are. So here's the FBX. So it's fbxmaya.mil. And just make sure you have that checked for loaded and auto load. And you can hit Close. And then you can export. So File, Export Selection. And this is going to be SM_ship. Over to my right, under File Type Specifications or Specific Options, let's make sure under Geometry that we have Smooth Groups checked. Smooth Mesh is fine, this one's fine. And then for animations, since we don't have any animation baked, we're going to go ahead and say no for that one. And then Export. And now we're going to go over to Unreal, and let's go ahead and get our project going. So for Unreal, I'm going to be in 4.22.3, I believe. New project. We're going to do a blank. We're going to be blueprint to keep it simple. And then I'm going to go ahead and make this scalable on the quality. I'm not going to use any starter content, but you are welcome to. And I will call this ship tut for tutorial. And then I hit create. And here we are in Unreal. You can see that we have our basic stuff. I'm going to come over to the left of my content browser here. Open that up, and I'm going to select content. Let's go ahead and add a new folder. So new folder, we'll do static mesh. I'm going to put my object in here. Go ahead and open that, and we'll do import. All right, and here's my ship. Go ahead and import that. It's going to ask you if you want to auto-generate collision. Go ahead and hit yes for now. I'll go ahead and hit import. I'm going to double click on my ship. So here's my ship. You can see it is center, and it is pointing in the correct direction. I'm going to go up to collision and do simplified collision or simple collision. And you can see this is the collision body that Unreal has given my ship. If you're not happy with this, you are welcome to create your own collision body. So up here under collision, you have a few options. You could remove a collision. You could do an auto convex. So if I do, for example, remove and then auto convex, I'll just hit apply. And you can see it'll try to map out your ship more accurately. And for us, it doesn't have to be too precise, but you don't want to snag on parts where, and if I control Z that for a second, you can kind of see, you don't want a scenario where something could have hit you here and it counts. When you're doing things for the player, you want to make it kind of precise. Let's say if we were shooting a boulder, it's fine if we hit here. The player's not going to care if he gets points. But if something clips the wing in a weird way, that would definitely make your player angry. So we don't want to do that. So I'm going to make sure I redo my construction here. So this should be more to the point. Good enough. I'll go ahead and save that. And let's create our blueprints. Oh, you can see that my ship came in with the texture, of course, which is handy if you're in Maya. Okay, so let's go to Content. Let's make a new folder. This is going to be Blueprints. And inside my Blueprints folder, I like to have some organization. What I'm going to do, call this one System. And I'll make another one. This one will be the player. And lastly, this one will be items. I'm going to go to my system. First thing is a game mode, so I'm going to right click, blueprint class. I'm going to come down to game mode base. And this will be my, I'll call this ship tut game mode. But whatever you're going to name your game, usually that's your game mode. I'm going to also go to my player. Let's create our player. I'm going to come down, we're going to choose a pawn. I'll just name that player. You could name it ship if you like. It's not going to hurt it any. Let's go ahead and open up our player pawn. And then add a component. We'll do a static mesh. I'll just name that ship. And I'm going to make my ship the root. And then I will load in my ship. So there it is. There's my ship. There's the root. Let's add the camera. Add component. So I'm going to do spring arm. So there's that. It comes in at the bottom, and I don't really want it at the bottom. I'm going to move it in just a second. Let's add a component to it. We'll do a camera. And here's my camera. So make sure that your camera is a child of your spring arm. You can tell by with it being tabbed under that the camera is a child. And if it is a child, it'll be attached to the end here. So when I move my spring arm, it moves the camera. You can change your target arm length closer or farther. This is up to you. I'm going to do 250. It's probably fine. I'll hit compile. And let's put our ship into the game. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize. I'll do a quick save all. Let's go to our system. We'll open up our game mode. For our default pawn, let's add our player. Compile that. Save it. Hit play. Oh, we didn't set it into our settings. So go up to Window, go down to World Settings, and you can actually set your game mode right here. So game mode, you can set that there, or you can do it in the project settings. So if we go to Edit and then Project Settings, we can also set it here under Maps and Modes. And just make sure that your default game mode is set to your ship. Yep. And there's my ship. It can't really move yet, and it kind of hovers there, but that's fine. Small things. Let's set up the controls. So Edits, Project Settings. I'm going to come down to Input. And for this, I'm going to need a couple axis maps. So Axis, open that up. Let's see. For the first one, I'll call this thrust. And for my thrust, I'm going to use the space bar. You're welcome to use whatever key you like. And then I add a new axis map. This one's going to be, let's do turn right. And I'll add one more key to that by hitting this little plus sign here. To turn to the right, I'm going to hit the D key. I'll close the gamepad here and load the D key in. And then to go left, I'll do the A key. Kind of collapse that, grab A. And then left will be negative. And that should be enough to get us going. I'm not going to set up any camera controls because we're going to have a static camera, so no need for that. Let's go ahead and hit that. Let's go back into our plane here. Go to Event Graph. The first thing we need if we're going to use any kind of physics is to set physics. You can move it without physics, but it's going to be more fun if we use it. So I'm going to say set simulate physics. Here's that. Comes in with a reference of the ship. And I'll check the simulate button. And then from there, let's see, we're not going to need the overlap. we may need the tick. Let's leave that down here for now. And with that going, let's hit compile, see if we fall. We should fall. Alright, so falling works, but we have our camera rolling with us. We don't want our camera to do that, so let's grab the spring arm. I'll come over to camera settings on the right, and I'll just uncheck inherit. So uncheck all of these. That way when the ship falls over, we don't roll the camera with it. Awesome. Let's get, drag this off. Let's do enable gravity. So set enable gravity for the ship. You might think, well, why do we need to enable the gravity? I'm actually disabling the gravity. So this gives us a quick way of turning gravity on and off specifically to the ship so that we can kind of control and debug it. So with that, I'm going to select all this, press the C key. I'm going to call this set physics. That's good enough. And let's make our controls. I'm going to right click, I'm going to get my thrust. So axis event thrust. And while I'm here, I'll also get my turn. So turn right. So axis event turn right. And for these, I'm actually going to use the physics options for generating force. So I'll say add force. I'm going to come down to add force to ship. So add force ship. There it is. Make sure we have accelerate change. And for this, I want to know which direction I'm facing. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my forward vector. So get actor forward vector. So this determines which direction we're facing and making sure that we're only applying thrust in our forward direction. So with that, I also need to drag this one off. Let's do float times float. So this is our axis value. This is where we're getting most of our force here. I'm going to promote this one to a variable. I'll call this, over here on the right, let's call that acceleration value. So AC accelerate. So I'm going to just abbreviate. I'll say rate. So accelerate. And then I'll compile to get a value. Let's do like, I don't know, 1,000. And then we have to multiply that by our forward direction. So I'm going to take that. I'll do times float here. So vector times float. And it gives us that. I'm going to plug this in. And then drive that to my force. So now this is going to do a little bit of math, figure out which way we're facing, and apply this. So if I use that, that'll allow me to go forward, right? But I don't really want to go forward. I want to go up. So I'm going to go back in. Now let's swap this out for our up vector. So I'm going to say get actor up vector. There we go. That should be correct. And then if I run that, so that gives us our up vector. But now that we have thrust working, we can turn gravity on. So I'll go up and check the gravity. Let's move our tick out of the way. And let's add in some stuff for our turn. So I'm going to use the torque option. So add torque. And all torque is it's a force applied in an angle, basically, or a rotational force. You have the option for radians or degrees. Degrees require a lot of force. Radians, not as much. So I'm going to go ahead and grab radians. Same kind of deal. I'm going to drag this off. I'm going to do a float times float. And I want to have an acceleration for my torque. So I'm going to drag this off. Let's do a right click. I'll do a promote to variable. I'll call this torque rate. So torque rate. I'll compile that. And I'll put a 1 in there for now, so we can just kind of see what that does. I'm going to open up my torque. Let's go ahead and right click and do a split pin. And I'm going to torque it on, I think I'll do the X torque. I'm kind of guessing at the moment. And then accelerate change. I'll compile. And let's see if we can rotate our ship. Actually, let's turn gravity back off, just so we can rotate freely without falling. So if I hit left or right, there we go. I have some rotation. But my rotations are reversed. So I'm going to flip those. You can flip those in here. So if we go to Edit, Project Settings, go down to Input, you can flip these. You can make your A value positive and your D value negative. You can do it there. Or you can reverse it in the code. Either one is perfectly fine. I'm just going to flip it here. And that gives me something more reasonable. So I can fly, and I can change my direction. And I can fly that direction. Let's go back in. And my torque value is kind of tiny, so I'm going to just bring that up to, I don't know, 5. I'm also going to change the mass of my ship, so let's go up to our set gravity here. And this is really just an aesthetic to make it easier to steer. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this off, and I'll do set mass, so set mass scale of ship. And for my mass scale, I'm going to promote this to a variable. Call that mass. You can do mass or mass scale, it's up to you. I'll make this instance editable. And I'll do maybe 0.5 on there. So now we're not quite as heavy. Tad more thrust. Maybe 2,000. Alright, so it can fly around. Whee! Okay, so that'll do it for this particular video. In the next one, we're going to set up some functionality to kind of keep us so we don't meander. Right now, if we fly around or whatever, we can move forward and backward into our world, and we want to be able to lock our position so we're moving only left and right. But we'll take care of that in the next video. We're kind of getting a bit long here. So go ahead and save your work, and I will see you next time.